Welcome back to Monday Musings, a casual conversation about culture and theology. I'm Justin Ely.
And I'm Daniel Chan. We're a couple guys talking about some stuff.
The stuff we are talking about is scriptural lenses. So how we view the world, how we view the Bible, and how we're not always as a neutral observer as we think we are.
It is funny, isn't it? I think if you asked yourself, when you come to the Bible, when you come to issues around politics or the world, whatever it is, you would say, no, it's neutral. But it's funny. There was a book called Evangelism in a Skeptical World. Fantastic book by Sam Chan.
Awesome book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he said once he had an American who said, you speak with an Australian accent. Do I have an accent? And he's like, what do you mean? Of course you have an accent. But the thing is, you can't see it because if you're only around people like you that talk like you, you're normal.
Correct.
And what we're talking about is everyone assumes their view on something is the normal
It's
view.
like the baseline.
Yes. Yeah. And everyone else's is off from normal, off from baseline. But here's the thing. They think that about you too.
Right.
Their view is baseline and yours is the weird one.
Right.
And that's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
How did we get here?
Yeah. It's funny. I find myself always thinking I'm the middle ground. Those people to the right of me are crazy and those people to the left of me are nuts, but I'm like the middle,
Yeah.
It's like, why are you always think you're the standard of, how to think about things?
Yeah.
But that's kind of what we're talking about this year or this podcast.
Yeah. And so last podcast, if you listen to it, we kind of went through like 8 different lenses that create one major lens of your worldview. Today, we're talking specifically about which pastors did you listen to when you were in your most influential time where you were spiritually formed.
Right.
And that really shapes how you see certain things. And we're going to talk specifically about theology here.
Yeah, especially when it comes to, and no problem if you don't know what these words mean. Calvinist or Arminian divides, eschatology, all that stuff. It was more impactful than you think. The people who were kind of the famous Christian preachers at the time when you kind of came of age spiritually. And for a lot of people, that's college, post-college era, but not exclusively. It's kind of where were you at in your faith development? Yeah.
And so, we came up with this idea for this podcast because it's funny because sometimes, as pastors, you get a lot of different viewpoints kind of thrown at you. And one of the things we've noticed is, especially about eschatology, end time views, we've had people come up to us and say, oh my gosh, it has to be premillennial view.
It's obvious.
Obvious. How can anyone, the scripture says that.
It says taken up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we were like, what's interesting? Most of those people are older than us. And we don't know how to explain this to them.
Right.
We're like, very few people, percentage-wise, our age, actually believe in that view. In the pre-tribulation, rapture,
the left behind.
The left behind view.
And then people in our age are like, Romans 9 clearly says this. How could anyone think any differently?
Yeah.
And someone else is like, well, actually, I do.
And here's a reasoning from my exegesis of the Bible.
And a lot more than you think is that kind of foundational influences on your life.
Yeah. And so we're going to go over these influences. We're going to start kind of in the 1920s, but let's just be honest, I'm just not that aware of what was going on back then. And so we're really going to talk more deeply starting kind of in as it starts to shape boomers, Gen X, starting in the 1970s, 80s. That's when we're really going to press in because, some of this history I don't know that much about. So.
And we just want to say, if you were born before the 1920s and you're listening to this, well done. We would love to hear from you.
Yes. Yes. I can't even imagine how I'm like, if you know what a podcast is and
if you're over 100 and you know what a podcast is and are listening, wow. Yeah. Not only props that you're alive, but props that you're listening to a podcast.
Yes.
So it starts out kind of with the fundamentalist or evangelical divide in the 1920s to 1950s.
Yeah, so you have J. Gresham Machen. He's pretty famous in the PCA world. His fight against liberalism in the Presbyterian Church and founding of Westminster Seminary shaped an anti-modernist and doctrinally rigid stream. And it's interesting. If you are from the PCA, that's kind of what the PCA is kind of known for, is like the gatekeepers of doctrine.
Yep.
But once again, it's because the Presbyterian Church has had a split, ultimately splitting off in the 70s into the PCA. But that's why, you have kind of this fight against liberalism. You also have Carl F. H. Henry and Harold Okenga. Have you heard
Okenga?
Okenga?
Yeah. He was a pastor in Boston, actually. And this is going to lead kind of into your next section, the post-war America section, but kind of the Billy Graham. So like J. Gresham Machen, very kind of doctrinally
sound.
Plant your flag down on a solid Presbyterian footing. Henry and Okenga, they're going broader evangelical kind of bigger tent, right? So you have the rise of Fuller Seminary, Christianity Today, and Billy Graham Evangelistic Association.
But once again, we still see that divide today.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
And part of it is like, how did that come about? None of us think about it. We just see that it exists. Man, there's a history to this.
There is a history to it.
And which stream have you been influenced by? Right? Because these people have influenced different preachers, different speakers, different pastors over the years. And depending on which stream you listen to, you would be like, obviously it's this one or this one.
Sure.
So.
Yep.
But then you have post-war America, kind of the 1940s to 1960s. I'm going to let you take this one because
Billy Graham's my boy.
Billy Graham is your boy, yeah.
Yeah, so you have Billy Graham, who, his crusades brought together broad ecumenical evangelicalism. And, it's really interesting because in this time, if you think about it, many have said that George Whitefield was actually America's first celebrity.
Right.
And Billy Graham was very much in that vein. So in this era, and this is so important in understanding is a very significant generational divide when it comes to this like Christian nationalism topic. It was America against the communists. And the communists were godless. Part of their
amen.
America. They were part of their like worldview was a godless worldview, and you had the rise of Billy Graham, who was promoting the Lord, but also there was this kind of, even though he went around the world and preached the gospel, there was a national identity to him. He was somewhat of a national celebrity, and during like Billy Graham's height, it was a very much like Billy Graham was not interested in talking about the differences in Christianity. He was not interested in talking about Calvinism or Arminianism. He wasn't interested in debating paedobaptism or credo baptism. He didn't get involved in that. He was pure evangelism. But what's interesting is, and he would always say at the end of his crusades, go to church tomorrow, belong to a church.
Yeah.
He never intended to make that the standard for church, but it did.
Yes.
And so if you came to the age of faith in this era, you probably thought secondary and tertiary doctrine was largely a waste of time. The other interesting thing that started to happen is church services started to model themselves after Billy Graham crusades. So Billy Graham would always close with "Just as I am." And if you were a part of a Baptist church in this time, most likely your church ended with "Just as I am" every single Sunday and an invitation to come forward. And sometimes they would keep singing that song until at least a person came forward, you know? And so you might have gotten saved several times just to allow everyone else to go to lunch, you know? But yeah, that kind of broad tent evangelicalism, really kind of major on the majors and don't emphasize the divides was part of that kind of Billy Graham era.
And another thing that I personally have seen from this era and really leading into the next era as well is what happened was, you know, Billy Graham believed in discipleship, but he was speaking to thousands and thousands of people that he could not disciple. Right?
Yeah.
And go to church the next week, but then churches started following Billy Graham. And I think in some ways he unintentionally brought about what we grew up in a little bit, which is like the moralistic therapeutic deism that like, I think what happened was you took that nationalism of the Billy Graham, like the gospel. He preached the gospel so boldly.
Sure.
But you go home and you're like, I came down, I prayed that prayer, I stood up, I went down the aisle.
Yep.
But no one taught you how to actually read the Bible. And so what did a lot of people do? You mixed it with the American dream.
Yeah.
And so what ends up happening is go to church because it's good. Believe in God because you there's some moral standard. When things are wrong, you can pray to him and God will help you. That therapeutic.
Yep.
But there's no really like understanding of what it means to have a personal relationship with Christ. And it's funny, and this is something we'll talk about too, is how generations try to correct the previous generation, because I saw this over and over again, at least in the suburbs in which I grew up. It was this effect that you had these, you know, parents and grandparents who grew up in this Billy Graham era who were trying their best to follow the Lord, but no one actually sat down and taught them how to do it.
Yes.
And so you came up with this like moralistic therapeutic deism, and then our generation came around, and this is where like the personal relationship phrase starts to really appear. Is when we're in high school and stuff, because we're like, no one taught us how to have a personal relationship, and we're correcting the generation before. Right. Just interesting. And if you grew up with the Billy Graham era, that's probably what your experience was.
Well, and another thing that I think is significant is Billy Graham became known for kind of the sinner's prayer, right? Pray this prayer after me to receive Christ. And you know, many in our generation have pushed back against that and be like, well, there's not a sinner's prayer in the Bible, you know, it's repent and believe, which I would agree with. I would say sometimes the over application of what Billy Graham did made people think that if I just pray this, I'm a Christian.
Right.
Even though he did try to emphasize, if you prayed that with a genuine heart of faith, you are now a Christian. But the overcorrection on our side has been, you know, well, when God sovereignly zaps you, you'll know what to do. And it's like, or maybe you could give people some direction on how to follow Christ.
It's so funny, and we haven't gotten to our generation yet, but our generation is not about the walk down the aisle like.
Right.
But you know what? It's not all bad.
Right.
It's sometimes good from on stage to be like,
make a decision.
Would you like to make a decision to follow Jesus today? And once again, for a lot of us, especially from the Reformed crowd, it's like, no, absolutely not. You know,
it's this overcorrection.
And I'm like, I get what you're saying, because in a sense, you got to wake up every day and make a decision to follow Jesus.
Right.
It's not this prayer, whatever. But at the same time, you got to make a decision.
Believe on Jesus. Yeah. And then in this time, you also had Francis Schaeffer, who influenced a lot of boomers and Gen X with a worldview approach, critiquing the culture, emphasizing defending Christianity against secular humanism, and more of the Reformed group. And like the philosophically leaning people cite him as pretty pivotal. So he was quite a thinker.
Schaeffer was a genius.
Yeah.
And if you're a philosophical thinker, you got to read Schaeffer.
Yeah.
I also am like thinking about, as we're doing this podcast, it's funny because it's like, you know, the Billy Graham, Francis Schaeffer thing is kind of re-emerging.
Sure.
In some ways.
Yeah.
Where you have like, you know, we did that podcast on Charlie Kirk, but Charlie Kirk is also I don't care about this theology. Bring people to Jesus. Like if you watch his
Yeah,
videos,
broad tent type
broad
of
tent.
Yeah.
And it was so popular amongst like younger Gen Z, older Gen
Correct.
Alpha.
Yep.
And same with Francis Schaeffer. All the stuff going on in our culture right now. I mean, you could just read Schaeffer and it diagnoses today's culture. You have to do a little bit of like modernizing some of the things he said, but the principles are all the same. It's interesting how it cycles as well.
Totally agree. Yeah.
Next, you kind of in the 60s and 80s, you also have the charismatic renewal. You have Oral Roberts, Catherine Coleman, later Benny Hinn, the Jesus movement with Lonnie Frisbee, Calvary Chapel, and Chuck Smith. And so once again, depending on how older you are, if you're listening, maybe how old your parents were, maybe they were super charismatic.
Yep.
And you're like, how did that come about? Well,
The Jesus movement.
Jesus movement.
My mom came to faith in the Jesus movement era, like, and she came to faith at a crusade with a guy that modeled his ministry after Billy Graham. And so those two influences came together, the Jesus movement and the Billy Graham kind of crusade movement, into my mom's, like, how she became a Christian. And the Jesus movement is really interesting because you have, again, like a knocking down of denominational boundaries.
Right.
You have an emphasis, and again, this was kind of with the Billy Graham crusade movement too. You have an emphasis on personal conversion and personal relationship with Christ. So we're not really talking about ticking the doctrinal marks. We're talking about a experiential heart relationship with Jesus. And it was kind of the Christian hippies.
Yeah.
Very, very interesting to see. So if you were raised in that movement, you probably never went to a church that talked about church discipline or like a lot of doctrinal standards, because that all felt dry to you. It was
Right.
all like the relationship with the Lord. And we did see, I mean, there was a massive movement of people that came to faith. And I'm sure some of those were false conversions, but a lot of them I think were real.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like your mom.
Yeah, like my mom. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, once again, it's easy to critique it or overly celebrate it.
Yeah.
And I guess what we're saying, too, is your view of whichever one, like you hear about the charismatic movement, you think something about it. You love it, you hate it, whatever it is. And it's like, well, that was developed by something. You don't just come up with that just randomly. It's you have a view that's been shaped by something or someone.
Correct.
And that's why you have that reaction towards
Yes.
a certain movement.
Yes.
And I think something else that I've seen and we've talked about too is when it comes to spiritual gifts in general, I think it's funny. It's like, why are some churches the only spiritual gifts like tongues and prophecy?
Right.
But then others are
Everyone
just
has it.
teaching and discernment.
Right.
It's like,
right. You seem to discern how everyone else is wrong really well.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think part of what we can learn here is, yes, like with all these movements, at the end of the day, God uses sinners, right? So they're not all perfect. But I think there's something to say, I think the point of this podcast is take a look at yourself.
Sure.
And say, you know what, am I a little too narrow here in my view? And what can I learn from, like...
Yeah, don't it's fine. Your local church, the boundary markers might be, smaller than the kingdom, but don't forget the boundary markers of the kingdom, and that's
what I'm saying.
That's your ultimate, like, the tent that you belong in. You might be at a different table inside the tent, but don't forget the tent is bigger than your table.
Yeah, because there's something to like. There's other churches and ministries that I've seen that I'm like, I don't know if I would go there.
Right.
But you know what? They're preaching the gospel and leading people to faith, and I say praise God for that.
Yes.
Now, there's also worth a discussion to say, hey, like, maybe you shouldn't do that way. But they have the right to say that to me, too.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So.
That's good. Interesting kind of piece here. And we got Chuck Smith kind of in the Jesus movement. Also, brings about the Calvary Chapel kind of churches. And And then Greg Laurie is the modern byproduct, both of the Billy Graham movement and the Jesus movement. And he kind of continues. He keeps doing crusades, and he's kind of similar in that vein. So that's interesting. So then you move on to the 70s to 90s, kind of the boomers and the Gen X shaping ministries.
Man, I tell you what, poor Gen X is like the middle child, you know. They always get left out. Everyone talks about the boomers, the millennials, and Gen Z.
Gen X, just those latchkey kids, you know, that came home to an empty house because both mom and dad were working.
Yeah. Okay, but this is really like, I think this, starting now is really when we're going to see.
Yes, this starts to get significant.
Our churches today.
Yeah.
And I'd say, you know, who were the most popular preachers in this time? John MacArthur, definitely. Mm-hmm. I think you probably throw R.C. Sproul in there. You know, they were best friends.
Right.
Charles Ryrie, Hal Lindsey. But dispensationalism and premillennial prophecy was really popular in this time.
Yes.
So you get a lot of like our parents who are all dispensational premillennials.
Yes.
You don't get a lot of dispensational premillennials when in our generation. It's very interesting.
No.
But if you talk to like, you know, boomers in this age, all of them are like, duh, this is of course.
Yeah.
This is of course what's right.
You know, what's interesting. So if you go back to the 1800s in America, there were a lot of, well, go back to the Reformation. And you've got a lot of amillennials.
Right.
Go back to the founding of America. You've got a lot of post-millennials. And then you've got 1900s, World War I, World War II, you know, and you're like, maybe not post-millennial.
Maybe, yeah.
And then you have the reconstitution of Israel.
And you're like,
wait
a second.
Premillennial.
Yeah.
So you have this premillennialism that really comes into American evangelicalism. I mean, Billy Graham was a premillennialist. And then you have like MacArthur, who is very, very dispensational. You have the rise of Dallas Theological Seminary. You have Adrian Rogers in this time as, you know, the pastor of Bellevue Baptist Church. And he's the first. You also have, starting in the 1980s, the conservative resurgence in the Southern Baptist Convention, starting with the election of Adrian Rogers as the SBC president, who was very dispensational. Charles Stanley at First Baptist Atlanta. All of these famous pastors, one huge like Baptistic influence in this time. But the Presbyterians are just getting ready for the next phase. Like they're more quiet in this time, but they're getting ready. And then very, very dispensational. So a lot of talk on the rapture. And so if you came to faith in this era, I mean, the rapture is almost as essential to your theology as like being born again.
Yeah.
It's very emphasized.
Yeah. And I would say too, and if you're one of these people with eschatology, I mean, once again, the founding of America, post-millennials are like, believe like, God is making the world like more and more like heaven, essentially, right?
Right.
So when you see the founding of America,
You're like, we're doing it.
We're doing it.
We're making it happen, man.
And then you see World War I and II, and you're like,
oh,
wait a second. And then you see Israel, like you said, and you're like, what? My point is, it's clear to see from your own personal experience what the scriptures clearly mean. And it's not so clear to everyone else that did not have your experience.
Yes.
Right? Like, all millennials are like, it's so clear to me in the scripture. Pre-millennials, it's so clear to me in the scripture. Post-millennials, it's clear to me in the scriptures.
Yep.
All of it has been framed by who the preacher was and what was going on.
Mm-hmm. And what's going on in the culture. Well, what do you mean the culture in America at this year? I mean, what's going on in the culture in Kenya in this year is very different than the culture in America. So we also kind of overread our own cultural moment into a lot of these discussions too.
And James Dobson focus on family came about in this time. Family values, strong families, moral conservatism, culture war concerns. Mm-hmm. And something, if you I love generational theory, and if you our listeners, if you're interested, just look up Strauss-Howe, STRAUSS-HOWE, two different guys who came up with this generational theory. But because of this theory, I've come up with a word to describe each generation and what it's like to influence that generation. I would say for boomers, it's duty.
Yeah.
Because of these things. Right? Do what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
And then boomers raised us as millennials. And this is so funny. How did gentle parenting come about? You know how it came about? Boomers wanted duty and taught millennials out of duty. Mm-hmm. And millennials
are a bunch of weak snowflakes and pounded under the pressure.
Well, we're like, you crushed me with the duty.
Yeah.
And you know what I'm going to do with my kids? You do whatever you want.
Delight.
You delight, you know, like, poor baby.
If you want to be a wildflower, you can be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is all generational theory
Yes.
stuff. And it's a result of, it's a correction of the previous generation. Isn't that funny?
For sure.
But this is part of it too. Boomers who go to church are very good at going to church.
Yes. Well, and actually...
Very good church members.
Hold on to the boomer conversation until we get to the seeker-sensitive movement, because there's a huge correlation there. That's important. And that kind of brings us to the millennials of the 90s and
this is us.
90s through 2010s. Hello, welcome. The truth has finally arrived. You're welcome.
And so we grew up in what's called YRR. The
YRR,
Young Restless
baby.
Reformed, with John Piper, Tim Keller, Mark Driscoll, Al Mohler. Strong resurgence of Calvinism. Really, if you were in college between 96 to 2010, you grew up YRR.
Yeah.
And I will say, and I said the most influential pastor in this time to me was Mark Driscoll. It's funny, most people don't know this, but I'm letting the cat out of the bag.
Risk it.
I'm actually a pastor because of Mark Driscoll's influence.
You know, I mean, it is impossible to undervalue his influence almost.
Yeah.
With young men
In this time.
You had, and it's almost maybe because the next bucket is like Willow Creek, Rick Warren, and the seeker sensitive movement. In some ways, that almost came first.
Yes.
It's almost like it's like 80s, late 80s into mid 90s. In late 90s, you had the seeker sensitive movement. So you had Bill Hybels and Willow Creek Community Church in Chicago. You had Rick Warren and Saddleback in California. And then you had Andy Stanley in North Point
and then
in Alpharetta. And it was like, so the seeker sensitive movement was the boomers who were bored with their churches. Honestly, they were bored with their churches the old way we used to do it. And the boomers creating the types of churches they wish they had been able to go to when they were in their 20s. That's what it was. And it was all these like, how do we emphasize methods that, make it easier to go to church? And so you have all these like, it was, how do we essentially take the lowest common denominator and do church that way?
Yeah.
And how do we almost, again, kind of importing the Billy Graham crusade, but on a Sunday morning, but in a different way, in a more like, we're going to hook them with how to become a better father, a bunch of how-to stuff, and then eventually introduce them to Jesus along the way.
Right.
So you kind of have that in the 80s and the 90s, fog machines, laser, you get rid of the choirs, create a band. And then almost the Young Restless Reform movement comes in almost as a correction to that. But not a return to the old choir, but this like doctrinally deep preaching.
Yeah.
Very Calvinistic in soteriology. So you have like John Piper. You have the rise of eventually the Gospel Coalition is created, and Tim Keller and kind of all that. David Platt comes out of all that. Al Mohler becomes the Southern Baptist king.
Yeah.
And is kind of moving the chessboard around. And then, like you said, you had Mark Driscoll, who, I mean, he's doing the things that the seeker-sensitive churches are doing, in the sense that he's got this big loud band and this dark room and these lights, but then he's preaching for an hour at a time.
He's yelling
at people.
And I'm like, yes, yell at me more.
Yeah, and a lot of young men were very influenced by him.
Yeah. And I just have to say, just to make sure I'm covered, I do not support everything he's done in the past. So if you're wondering, oh my gosh, does Daniel just support everything he's done? No, but he did influence me to, I say, like, it's all about the gospel all the time.
Yeah.
That's from him.
Yep.
My passion to, like, disciple, that's from him.
Yep.
My, like, willingness to give my life away and want to give my life to the kingdom, it's a lot from his preaching.
Yep.
So
here's something so interesting about this, right? So let's take the preaching thing. And I'd argue that Keller really mastered Christ-centered preaching. And Driscoll kind of, like, came off of that in a way. But for people like us who grew up, like, I remember the first time I heard like a Christ-centered sermon in the Old Testament.
you're like, what?
I was like, what? I think it might have been Tim Keller had this message called Getting Out on the Exodus, and it was the parting of the Red Sea. And he took you straight to Jesus, and I was like, that's the most amazing thing I've ever had.
Yeah.
And then you had Matt Chandler get invited to a conference by Stephen Furtick at Elevation.
You're not David.
And You're Not David, when Stephen Furtick had just preached that you are, or something. I mean, it was like wildly awkward. And so in this generation, like the generation before, kind of the old school, like Adrian Rogers, and leading into the seeker-sensitive movement, it was a lot of like, we're going to do a sermon series on how to be bold like Daniel. We're going to talk about how to be like strong like David. And then the Young Restless Reform movement just comes in with a wrecking ball to that. It's like, you're not David. Yeah. Jesus is David. In process, one of our elders, you know who you are, has offered me helpful correction on this over the years, because it can be taken too far.
Yeah. Because in some sense you are David.
Yeah. And Hebrews 11 lists people as like examples of faith.
Yeah.
And so you had that was a big preaching change between the generations, and there's some good and there's some bad there. In the Young Restless Reform movement, by and large, you had a pretty a larger interest in like small groups and discipleship, a decrease in like traditional Sunday school.
Yeah.
You
had Calvinism was really popular.
Calvinism was a lot more popular. If you grew up in the Adrian Rogers era and you wanted to be a pastor, you more likely wanted to go to pastor a big church.
Yeah.
Big building, big footprint, baseball program, football program, soccer program.
Sign me up.
If you grew up in the Young Restless Reform movement, you wanted to plant a church in an urban center and be poor the rest of your life.
Yeah.
So the like shifting in like what even ministry looked like was very different.
And to your point too, it's funny, YRR and then Willow Creek, North Point, Passion kind of ran side by side.
They did.
As we see, we're now back to 100 years ago in the early 1900s, where you had two different movements kind of run side by side.
Yes.
Right? History always repeats itself. And it's interesting because I would say for the millennial generation, the word I would use is experience.
Sure.
A lot of people are seeking experiences because they felt like they were like, they didn't want to follow all the rules of their parents or whatever. And so,
and even like most millennials who became Calvinist, they talk about discovering the doctrines of grace as though it were a second conversion.
Yeah.
And it's the experience word, right? It's
Yeah.
like, man, and then I listened to John Piper and like
I had this experience.
Everything changed, It's for as much as there's a doctrinal focus, there was a very experiential component to it.
There was. And that's also how we joke about like the lights and the fog machines came about to create an experience for you.
Right.
And you either leaned into that experience or you were part of the YR movement saying, no, that's like manipulating emotions. And what I want to say to that is, if you go too far on either side, it's bad. Mm-hmm. Right? Because guess what? We're supposed to engage. Most of our listeners probably Reformed. It's good to engage with the Lord with our emotions. Mm-hmm. That's not a bad thing. That's a really good thing.
Yeah, it's safe. Yeah, it's almost like both of these, again, were a certain degree of a reaction. Like, most people who became young, restless, and reformed were completely obnoxious in the beginning. Probably the both of us included.
Yeah.
It's called
I was horribly obnoxious.
Cage stage Calvinism.
Yeah.
And you're like, did my Sunday school teachers even know what the Bible was? Just this like obnoxious, like.
Yeah.
And so, right, it's this reaction of, I feel, one person, Tim Keller said one time, came up to him and was like, I've been in church my whole life. I've never heard the gospel preached before. You're the first one that's ever preached the gospel. And he's like, I'd encourage you to go back and listen to your childhood pastor and see if that's true. And they came back the next week and they were like, oh, he preached the gospel all the time. And he's like, yeah, it was you, not him. And that's like, it was a lot of this movement. It was like, my church never preached the Bible. And so it was this shift back. The seeker-sensitive movement, kind of in the same way of like, but a different direction of, my church wasn't engaging. My church wasn't, they just followed the traditions all the time. And, now that we got rid of a steeple and replaced it with a movie theater, everything's going to be better.
Yeah. And it's funny because in a sense they can learn from each other, right?
Yeah.
For the seeker-sensitive, it's like, hey guys, church is like for the saints. And like
right.
Numbers aren't the only thing that matter, and you should like disciple your people. And for the YR people like us, it's like, you know what? Like, just because your church is tiny isn't like a badge of honor where it's like we should be reaching as many people as we can for God's kingdom.
Yeah,
right.
That's a good point.
And like, yes, church is for the saints, but honestly, you got to think about how do you reach the seekers. That's also a valid question.
100%. And that brings us to Gen Z, the 2010s to 2020s.
I'd say this is still kind of going on. Too, because a lot of Gen Z still listen to experienced the YRR and similar pastors. What I want to add here, we have some, Rod Bell, Rachel Hill Evans, Brian McLaren. Like, really though, like this is the generation of like TikTok theologians. And I would say it's less about one pastor, but just being bombarded with like 30-second to 2-minute clips of all these different people giving their opinions on theology. And I would say it's led to more progressiveness in churches because of this.
You've had a lot of people abandon the historic Christian sexual ethic and orthodoxy on like
who?
Universalism, really.
Yeah. And who is the lady that wrote like "Girl, Wash Your Face" or something?
Yeah, there was.
But really, I would say, girl, don't read that book.
Right.
Yeah, like I think she's. I read an article about her recently. She's completely abandoned the faith.
Jen Hatmaker, is that?
Maybe. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff out there.
Yeah.
That you. So, anyways, with this one, I would say most of the things that have influenced this generation, don't listen to any of that. Right.
Don't. Just as a general rule, don't get your theology from TikTok.
Just don't do it.
Strong recommendation.
But this is also like once again, there's a lot of overlap between the millennial Gen Z, but with Hillsong Elevation, Bethel has really become popular with in this time frame too, where some of the more emotionalism has reemerged. But I would say that was 10 years ago. Now in 2025, I would say the word I would use to describe Gen Z is actually authentic, because you no longer need to go to a church to see a show.
Correct.
Right? But Gen Z and Gen Alpha are being bombarded with information constantly. I mean,
Right.
like all day, every day through their phones.
Correct.
And so I actually personally believe what's going to draw Gen Z is one, authenticity. You tell the truth, and you tell the truth about yourself, right? You show your sin and show what true repentance is.
Right.
You're not afraid. Why did Charlie Kirk once again reach so many college students? Because he was unafraid to speak up about what he believed was true, right? And I would say too, I think creeds are going to make a comeback.
Yes.
And I'm actually glad we do the creed at our church, because the creed shows you, hey, people have been saying this for years.
Long time.
There's been a huge resurgence in the past 3 years of especially young men going back to the Catholic and Orthodox churches. The reason is because they say there's all this stuff on TikTok that's rooted in nothing.
Yep.
Let's just go back to the church that is oldest.
Yep.
And that's the
Correct.
That's the we would say as Protestants we trace our lineage back to Jesus.
Yeah, the first
Everyone
church was
says that.
Baptist, obviously. Yeah.
But like historically, the oldest institutional church is the Catholic/Orthodox Church, right? And they can fight it out to say who's
good luck on that one.
But we have another podcast. We had another podcast on that.
Yeah.
But there is something to because there's so much progressiveness, there's so much hate on men in the culture. There's so much just stuff bombarding you with information all the time. When Gen Z and older Gen Alpha step into a church, you need to give them, this is what the truth is.
Yes.
I think we're going to see a resurgence when they're 40. There might be a resurgence of some of this like doctrinally sound, creedal. I think you're going to see a lot more like creed abiding.
Well,
40-year-olds.
I totally agree. Yeah. And the interesting thing is, again, like apologetics has changed, because what was, 10, 20 years ago, like Josh McDowell, evidence that demands a verdict, like give people really compelling reasons to believe the resurrection. It's still important. But Gen Z is more likely to be like, I'm open to the idea of a resurrection if I see that your life is worth like following.
Yeah. It's more postmodern.
And so it's more like, give me a compelling story to live my life by. And sure, I'd be open to that, versus that's ridiculous, that's anti-science. So the conversation has moved, and where people's objections are very different than where they were 10 years ago. And one of the struggles of the church is, you've got people are like, how to reach millennials, and we're old. Like you've missed it. Like now it's Gen Z. Like, and you have to adjust your strategy.
And you gotta start talking Gen Alpha.
Yeah.
And what I believe you're gonna see is, you're going to see a resurgence of this conservatism, and the cycle will just restart.
Yes.
And you're going to have people say, I'm going to push back against that. Look at all these rules, whatever. And then you're going to get some of the seeker sensitive kind of research. It's funny. These things cycle.
Yeah. So, our encouragement is as you consider like both theological positions and almost like ministry practice positions that you think, how could anyone think any differently?
Yeah.
Consider like when you came of age in your faith. Consider the pastors and the movements that were most predominant and how that may have affected you today.
Whether you said, yes, I'm going to go with that,
or I totally disagree with that. Yeah. Consider how it affected you. So it's a kind of interesting thought experiment. But before we leave, we'd love to share our listener of the month.
Our listener of the month is Bryant Whelan. He's a friend. He's a neighbor, our HOA president, and he is a valued, longtime listener. And I want to say, I bet we could find it. I think he was a listener of the month in the past.
Wow.
But he did not get to hear his name called on that podcast. So we care about you so much, Bryant. We want to make sure that you get to hear your name on this podcast. So
And
thank you for listening.
Yeah, thank you. And anyone who is willing to volunteer to be an HOA president deserves a little pat on the back every once in a while.
Bryant's one of the best guys I know.
Man.
He is, man. He just loves to help people and serve, and he's always got a great attitude, man. He texts me every time this podcast comes out. He always sends me a word of encouragement. So we appreciate you, Bryant.
That's awesome. Well, thanks for listening, Bryant. And thank you for listening, and we'll catch you next time on Monday Musings.